Inquisition. As we go through today, I do hope and I do pray that we will cover many of the terrible events that have happened since October 7th in Eretz Yisrael, our home. The first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed by Bava. The second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed by Rome. Each one of these destructions was was both political. It was a military conquest. They wanted money. They wanted power. It was not done for religious reasons per se. And if you want to see the four gullias that the Jewish people have gone through, open up your Kinnos. If you want to open the Kinnos that the Shul has given you, it is on page 137, Kinnos Lamed. If you have an art scroll Kinnos, it's on page 286, and it describes the four Malchus, the four times that we were sent to Gullus by the Kodesh Baruch Hu preordained. There's going to be four Shibushit with Malchus, and it describes them all. I'm not going to focus on all four. I'm focusing on what we're doing today. Rome, the country of Rome, which destroyed the second Beis Hamikdash. Rome ruled for 300 years. Rome was so large that it was divided in half and was ruled by two different countries. The eastern half ruled from Byzantium, and the western half was ruled from Rome. The Constantine was emperor of the eastern half, which ruled from Byzantium. And when Constantine, he was born in 272, he died in 337. When Constantine was emperor of Rome, again, he was in the eastern half. He had a general that began to rebel against him. The name of the general was Maxentius. Maxentius began as a general to go against the emperor Constantine. Maxentius had a larger army. He was a general. He had a more powerful army, and Constantine got very nervous. Wasn't sure what to do. His mother, Helena, was a devout Catholic, and she kept telling her son, "You cannot beat your enemy. Maxentius is too powerful. His army is too strong. The people are with him. The only way that you could possibly defeat him, the only way, is if you believe in God." To which he said, "There is no such thing as a God." She says, "You got to believe in God. Otherwise, it's not going to work." He wasn't sure what to do. The day of the battle, he looks up towards the sky, and it's a cloudy day, and the sun is shining through some of the clouds. And he says to himself, "I can see the cross, the sign of God, shining the sun through the clouds." And he told all of the soldiers to put the sign on their shields, and he went to battle against Maxentius, and he defeated them. He was so impressed with his mother's prophecy that if you fight with God, you're going to win. And he was so impressed that the day of the battle, he saw the cross shining through the clouds, and all of his soldiers put it on top of their shields. He decided, because of that, that in the year 313, at the end of the battle, the year 313, until then, Rome was a pagan country. Christianity was outlawed. He allowed Christians to worship properly in the kingdom or the Roman Empire. By the year 350, Christianity was no longer simply allowed. It became the religion of Rome. Synagogues began to be burned. Bris Milah was not allowed. Kashrus was forbidden. And the holy day of Saturday, or Shabbos, was moved to Sunday. Emperor Theodosius was a terrible anti-Semite. He forbade Judaism completely, not just disallowed some events that we did like Shabbos and Milah. He forbade Judaism. And in 393, Christianity became the official religion of Rome. As we all know, Rome falls. It was too large. I'm not going to get involved in why Rome fell. Speak to a historian, but Rome does fall. And even though Rome falls, the church gets stronger than Rome ever was. Rome was a country. It divided, it conquered, it divided, it ruled. And some of the people that lived under Roman rule, some enjoyed it, some didn't. It was very difficult for Rome to hold on. But now that they have an official religion, the Catholics have an official religion, it didn't make a difference which country you came from. It didn't make a difference which army you had. Something unified all of the non-Jewish world. we'll get to the Arab soon. We're not up to the Arabs yet. We're only in the year 313, 393. So now, even though Rome falls, the church becomes the most powerful entity on the planet. The church now rules. I cannot tell you how many Kinnos we have simply because of what the church has done since it was founded. Believe it or not, when the church was founded, so in the beginning years, it was a little bit rocky. The reason why it was a little bit rocky was because when Yashka was alive and he was preaching, he had a few apostles. He didn't have many. Most people did not believe in Yashka. When very little was written down when he was alive. When he died, and all of a sudden the apostles began preaching, and he was no longer a man. They invented him as a God, a son of God, a demigod, a partner with God. They have no idea exactly what Yashka happens to be. They're not sure. And all of the Gospels began writing, quoting him, even though he lived hundreds of years earlier and nothing was ever written down. But the church got very strong. The church believes strongly in something called the need to proselytize, where you want to call it gospel, where there's a whole big branch of Christianity, Catholicism, called the evangelicals. Where does that come from? We're Jewish people. We were the original religion in the world. We don't believe in proselytizing. In fact, when someone wants to come and they want to become Jewish, we push them away. We say, no, don't push them away once, push them away twice. I don't believe you're ever going to find a Jew going out to a different religion and trying to bring them close. What we try, and we're very successful at, is if someone was born Jewish, but they were lost, they don't know anything, so we bring them back. That's not called to proselytize. That is called kiruv. And we believe if you're already born Jewish, you might as well learn about Judaism. But they believe in proselytizing. What does the word proselytize mean? And you can Google this. It means to convert or attempt to convert someone from one religion to a different religion. And the Catholics believe very strong in this idea of to proselytize. Why? By the way, you come upstairs to my desk, my office, you'll find I receive every few months. I'll find a New Testament. I'll find articles why Jesus was the Messiah. I do look at them, and they have beautiful letters. I know you're a rabbi, I know you're a synagogue, I know you're Jewish, but deep down in your heart, you realize that even though you are Jewish and you are a rabbi, and they say you have the biggest shul in Staten Island, you do know in the bottom of your heart, the truth is that Yashka was the Messiah, and if you want some help, we'll give. And I get all these letters all of the time. They believe very much in proselytizing. Why do they believe in proselytizing? And I will quote to you. I'll quote from Luke. It says in Luke 24, verse 47, as Christ was dying, he proclaimed and says, I will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. When I rise from the dead, repentance and forgiveness of all sins will be preached in his name to all nations that accept me as their leader. Believe it or not, in Acts 2, verse 38, Peter writes, and Peter says, I am now going to explain to you the words of Yashka. And he began speaking. And this was the first time he began to proselytize. And he says, I cannot reach you unless I speak to you. And he gave one of his first sermons. On the spot, he proselytized and he converted 3,000 Yidden to follow him now, Yashka. Please do not forget, Rome was in charge of the country. The persecutions of the Jews was terrible. And if someone got up, and by the way, everyone agrees that Yashka was Jewish. Everybody agrees that Peter was Jewish. If you understood at the time the Jews were living in were so difficult, and all of a sudden someone supposedly rises from the dead on the third day, as he supposedly prophesies, I don't know who stole his body, but supposedly he rose from the dead on the third day, and Peter begins giving his drushes, and Yashka supposedly said on his deathbed, if you do not believe in me, you will burn in utter damnation in hell for eternity. And all you need to come to the kingdom of the Lord is to believe in me. Very easy. And therefore, the last mandate of Yashka was go and make disciples of all nations. If you Google the word gospel, what does gospel mean? Gospel means good news. What is the good news? So Yashka, before he died, and Peter began explaining this, Yashka simply says, you have to believe in me. And Yashka says, I'm giving you good news, which is gospel means good news. And the good news is I'm going to rise from the dead, and anyone that believes in me is going to be going to Gan Eden. It's called good news. They say and they write. If you would imagine for a moment that someone invented a cure for cancer, what would you do? I would run and tell the world. Imagine for a moment, we find out today, with Tisha the Mashiach is coming. The word would spread like wildfire. Whether it's done with a shofar, whether it's done on social media, however it's done, it would spread in a minute. Whenever there's good news, the word spreads. If there's a war and there's a peace, it spreads like wildfire. I know in Eretz Yisrael, whenever we recover a hostage, within 3 minutes, the entire Jewish world knows what happened. It's good news. And therefore, since the good news is, as Yashka writes, Satan has been vanquished. When Yashka was killed, and it took away all of our sins, so Satan, and he writes, Peter says, Satan is on the run because Yashka has arisen. And therefore the good news, spread it to the world, spread it to your friends. All you've got to do is believe in Yashka, and you will then be going to Olam Haba, because that is the kingdom of heaven. But if you don't believe in it, you will burn in utter damnation forever. And therefore the church, according to what Peter said, the last mandate of Yashka was to give out the gospel, the good news, and therefore the need to proselytize is ingrained in their religion. Before the Inquisition, that we all are famous, that we know very well about, the Inquisition of 1492, there was an Inquisition called the Medieval Inquisition. Pope Lucius III began the Inquisition, his first Inquisition, in 1184. Why did he begin an Inquisition? I know in Judaism there are many types. We have Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and in Orthodox we have Ashkenazim, the Sephardim, Hasidim. But more or less, in the Orthodox circles, we all believe in the same thing. We believe Torah Min HaShamayim. Our Shulchan Aruch is more or less the same. We have a few variances, but the core of our Judaism, even though we are the oldest of religion, the core of our religion is the same by every single sect that we have. By the Christians, the Catholics, there are more sects than we have. The reason why there are so many differences is because they really have no idea who Yashka was. They have no idea what he said. They have no idea what he stood for. They can't even tell you when they speak about the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Father is our God. Son is Yashka. Who's the Holy Ghost? What is the Holy Ghost? They don't exactly know. They do not know if Yashka was a God or not. If he was a God, how could he die? And if he was human, how could he be God? They're not exactly sure his father, his mother. They don't know many things about him. And therefore, from the beginning of when Rome finally became a Catholic country in the year 393, the official religion, and the church began to gain its strength, especially when Rome fell. They needed something to fill the void. They needed something to combine the world, and the church filled in that void. They began having synods or meetings, trying to figure out our religion that we now have accepted upon ourselves. Tell me something about the religion. So in the year 1184, Pope Lucius III began to try to put together this religion called Catholicism, and he invented something called the Inquisition. Inquisition, when he formed it, was not against the Jews. It was against different parts of the church, and they wanted them all to be on the same page, exactly explaining who, what, and when was Yashka. Pope Gregory the Ninth, in the year 1230, took the Inquisition a little bit further, and again, this was basically to root out heresy amongst the Catholic Church, and he formed two groups. One was called the Dominicans, and one was called the Franciscans, the friars. He made two groups, and they went around the entire Catholic world, which was a good part of the world at the time, and they spoke to all of the priests, and they spoke to all the people, and they're trying to figure out if our religion, the church, is on the same page or not. Inevitably, this Inquisition to root out heresy fell on the doorstep of the Jew. Most other churches fell in step with the Pope. Pope was the most powerful man at the time. They fell in step because the Dominicans and the friars or Franciscans killed many. They tortured many to get them in line. but inevitably it falls on the footsteps of the Jewish people. We refused to yield. We didn't go for this Yashka mumbo jumbo. We didn't care what you were telling us about Son of God, God. We don't care that he was the Mashiach. We don't believe in anything, and therefore it fell on the Jews. The church, in an already after when the Inquisition was formed in 1148, and now the Pope Gregory formed the Dominicans and the Franciscans to root out the heresy amongst the Jews. They realized that as long as we have our Sepharim, as long as we have our books, which writes down our religion, they're never going to beat us. Don't forget, they didn't have any books. They invented the New Testament. Different Talmidim, years after he lived, began writing. They're not consistent. And we have, amongst the Jewish people, besides the Torah Sheb'Sav, we have Torah Sheb'al Peh. There's not an aspect of our life which is not covered. There's not an aspect of a Kadosh Baruch Hu that is not explored. And therefore, how in the world can they beat us with our religion, which is so perfected over since we received it, and from Avram Avinu and Sarah, they're never going to beat us. So they decided the only way they can beat us is if they get to our Sfarim and they began having disputes. One of the earliest disputes was with the Dominican, Pablo Cristiani, and it was in the year 1263 in Barcelona against the Ramban, the king at the time was King James of Aragon, who was in Spain and Barcelona, who was against the Ramban. All of these disputations that took place, thousands of people came. The church sent all of its wisest scholars. The king and the queen sat, and they went on for days. And there were rules exactly how they're going to debate. I know that the King James of Aragon, after the debate with the Ramban, is supposedly have said, I never heard anyone defend such a wrong position so eloquently and so beautifully. But of course, the Ramban lost and he was kicked out of the country. Every one of these people that came to dispute with us was a Jew that went off the derech. There's no way they can dispute us and find Gemaras against us, and find Psukim and Tanakh against us, and find Halacha and part of our davening against us, unless they were Jewish people. All of those people, whether it was Pablo Cristiani or Nicholas Donin, I can tell you their Hebrew names. In fact, Pablo Cristiani was a Talmud by the Ramban. He was quoting him. Interesting, at some point in the debate, the Ramban by mistake called him by his Yiddish name, his Hebrew name, which was Avner. And Avner said to him, you never cared for me. And Avner then said to the Ramban, you told me once that in Parshas Hazinu, you can find a hint to everything that's ever going to happen. So Avner says, I dare you to find where you can find me in Parshas Hazinu. And the Ramban opens up Hazinu, and there's 4 psukim there. The pasuk begins with an aleph, second word Bey, second word Nun, second word Resh, and it says over there, Ashchisem, I'm going to wipe them out. I'm going to send them to the 4 corners of the world because they're blasphemous. It's in Hazinu. Ramban shows it to him, it didn't make a difference anyway. That was Avner. A more famous one of these disputations or debates took place between Nicholas Donan and Rabbeinu Yechiel from Paris. Yechiel from Paris was the Gadol Hador. He was one of the Baalei Tosfos. Took place in the year 1242. In your art scroll, it is Kina Mem Aleph, page 360. In your shul, Kina, it is Kina Mem Gimel, page 161. Page 161 in your shul. Art scrolls, page 360. I just want to read this inside for a minute, but we do have to say some Kinnos inside, and it's called Sha'ali through Fal Ba'esh, L'Shlom Avelayach. Hamis Avim Shchon B'Chatzar Zulech. What happened? There was a debate. They realized they could only beat us by getting rid of our Svarim. So Nicholas Donin, who was an apostate, he learned by Rabbeinu Yechiel from Paris. Rabbeinu Yechiel from Paris had no choice, but at some point he had to kick him out of the best medrash. He was mamash a kofar baker, kicked him out of the best medrash. He becomes a priest. He becomes a Dominican. Those are the ones that are in charge of rooting out all heresy, and he makes a trip to Italy, and he goes to the Pope, and he tells the Pope, "You want to beat the Jews?" Already in the year 1200, you already had with you Pope Gregory made the Dominicans and the Friars, the Franciscans, to wipe out heresy. It's because of their books, and I learned in their yeshivot. I learned with them, and I know it's all because of the books, and I can show you in the Gemara, and I can show you many parts of Tanakh that have open heresy against Joshua. And he opens up Gemaras, and there are Gemaras. There's a whole Masechta called the Vodazara. There's a few Gemaras that mention Yashka. Many of our Gemaras do not have it because they took it out. The censors took it out for exactly $5. You can buy all of the parts they took out. It's called Chesronos Hashas. And now if you buy all the programs, whether you buy Bar Ilan or you buy all of those Sefaria, they all have all of the versions. And he showed them inside, black on white. When we speak about Yashka, we speak about Avodah, and therefore the Pope was so excited. He sent a letter to the King of France at the time. King of France was King Louis IX, otherwise known as St. Louis, because he was such a wonderful, outstanding person. The city of St. Louis is named after him, King Louis IX of France, and they had this wonderful debate. Of course, in this debate, Rabbeinu Yechiel from Paris lost. It was a foregone conclusion they was going to lose. And then King Louis, together with the Pope, decided that they're going to collect every sefer in France. France, in the year when this took place, 1242, France, Rashi passed away. Rashi was born in 1040. Passed away in the beginning of 1100s. He had children, daughters, sons-in-law, grandchildren. They formed something called the Balei Tosfos. They took Rashi, they took the Gemara, they took what a little bit was not clear, and each one began writing the explanations on Shas. France, parts of Germany, France, was the cradle for Ashkenaz learning. Rashi and his grandsons literally wrote the book, and there were Balei Tosfos, hundreds. There were thousands learning, and each best medrash came up with their give and take, the Ashkenazic learning. So in France, when they went out and they collected every single sefer, number one, in those days, this was before, the printing press. Every sefer was written by hand. Many were the original copy, and many were the only copy. Imagine if you were one of the Talmidim of Rashi, a grandson. This is only 150 years after Rashi passed away, and you're learning what your Zayden said Rashi. You're learning. You're in one of the Balei Tosfos, and you wrote down your pshat. So we have Tosfos on the side of the page, and we have many of them. And there's also Tosfos Harosh. If you look in the Yiddish library, there are many different Balei Tosfos. Even the ones that we have inside of the page, is it all of them, or many have been burned? And they went around France, they went into every single shul, and they collected every single sefer. Every single sefer they collected. Cartloads and cartloads of foreign, all handwritten, all original, some one of a kind. And they took it, and they burnt it. They burnt them all. The Marami Rottenberg, who was a Talmud of Rabbeinu Yechiel from Paris. So Rabbeinu Yechiel from Paris was forced to flee because he won, he lost the debate, he fled, and he left behind the Marami Rottenberg, who wrote this Kinnos. Marami Rottenberg writes, and many other Meforshim write, and they say the most scary thing, which we should all think about. They burnt every sefer. There are people, HaRav Yaakov, there are people, the Shagas Aryeh, they know learning by heart, or Moshe Feinstein. Most of us don't. Most of us need to read something inside. They took every single sefer that we own, whether it was a Siddur, whether it was a Chumash, whether it was a Mishnah, whether it was a Gemara. There wasn't a Hebrew book left in France. We cannot survive. We cannot do it. Yes, we can go to Cheder and teach Kamatz Aleph, Kamatz Beis Ba. But when you want to start teaching Chumash, and you want to start teaching Mishnah, you want Gemara, you want the Rishonim, you want anything, there was nothing left. Marami Rottenberg was convinced this was the end of Ashkenazic Jewry because there are no Sfarim that are here. Please do not forget, this took place in 1242. The first crusade took place in what year? 1069. They were reeling from the Crusades. And as they were reeling from the Crusades, in all of France and Germany, there were no Sfarim left. It was a terrible situation. They asked a dream. They sent up Havrav Tzidkiyahu ben Avram HaRofeh, one of the Rishonim. They couldn't figure out what's going on. They couldn't figure out how God can do this. So they sent them up in something called a chalom. There's a way to, when you go to sleep at night, a Yiddish person has three different parts of his neshama. One is very connected to the body. One is very spiritual, and it's basically in Shamayim. And there's another one that goes up and down between the heavenly neshama and the physical neshama. So that neshama that goes up and down, you can ask it a question that when it goes up at nighttime, when you sleep, and it could find out what's going on, what's going on behind the curtain. And he asked the Kadosh Baruch Hu, how in the world can this happen? What are we supposed to do? How could this happen? We have learning, we have Torah, we have millions of people learning. How in the world can this happen? So the answer they got from Shamayim was simply Dag Zeres Daraisa, which means it is a heavenly decree. Dag Zeres Daraisa. The dream took place on Erev Shabbos Parshas Chukas. If you open up Chumash Parshas Chukas and you look at the Onkelos, when it says Zos Chukas Torah, he translates it Da Zera Daraita. So therefore, they figured out that the Friday of Erev Shabbos Parshas Chukas, the decree came down from Shamayim to do this, and that's what happened. In hindsight, they were trying to figure out why this happened. In hindsight, what did they come up with? They burned their Rambam. They burned the Rambam 100 years earlier. The Dominicans, by the way, this sect of the church that's supposed to root out heresy. So many Jewish people were against the Rambam. They were against the Moreh Nevuchim, which is philosophy. They were against many parts of Mada, where he wrote the philosophy in the Yad HaChazaka. And they went to Dominicans and they showed them how the Rambam is against Yashka. They wrote and they said to him it's against it. And they collected, and the church, of course, readily agrees that the Rambam is against Yashka. And they collected all the Rambams and they burned it. They burned it. Believe it or not, after they burnt it once, and it was hard to get hold of a copy of the Rambam, they burnt it again in the year 1242. They burnt it again 40 days before the disputation. 40 days before they collected every sefer in France, 40 days before this is happening to the Ashkenazim, they burnt the Rambam again. And if you ever go to France, I don't know why you want to go, but if you go to France, there's a museum called the Louvre. Right behind it is a very famous square. That's where they burnt the Rambam 100 years ago, 100 years before 1242. And that's where they burnt it 1 month before the disputation. When they burnt the 21 cartloads of Sfarim in France, and there wasn't a sefer left. The people saw the ashes from the burnt Rambam mingling with the ashes of all of the Baalei Tosas that were now burnt. And when the ashes mingled, everyone said to themselves, the reason why this Gezerah happened is because Jews don't get along. How is it possible? It's not possible that we were the ones that burned the Rambam. We went to the church. We pointed out what's wrong with the Rambam 40 days after they burnt the Rambam, 40 days. And the ashes were still there. They mingled with the ashes of the new Sfarim, and therefore they said, we now know what's going on. It's a beautiful kina, Shali Srufa Beish. It describes how the Torah given to us by Moshe was given to us by our Tanoim, the Amoraim. It all became burned. How was it possible? He writes that the Torah that was given with fire, Tuchal be'esh basar, is now burnt by physical fire. And how is it possible that the church that's burning it are not being punished? Oh, Tigzor Listrov das Eish v'chukim. How is it possible that these things can happen? And that's going to be the end. How could it be that it's burnt? And it says, B'chodesh HaShlishi, the Torah was given in the 3rd month, Nisan or Sivan, V'hukshar HaRavi, and now in the 4th month, which is Tammuz, it's being burned. L'hashli Schem Dasech V'chol Yofi. How is it possible that the most beautiful thing in the world, the Torah, is burned? The burning was sent out like an irony dachas that's burned to the ground. V'sarfu Shlal Elyon, the most prize of all the Jewish people, is being burned. Asher Timaz Lovo Kalasech, by the man that was kicked out, which was Nicholas Donin, and that was the burning. Lakach Sur Kaspo, he writes of his Rebbe, he took a bundle of money, his wallet, Halach B'derech L'Merchok, he had to run away from the country. V'imo Holu Nosutz L'Olayach, and with him, many of the yeshiva went with him to Eretz Yisrael. Va'ani, and the Marami Rottenberg finishes and says, Kishaku v'Galmud Nisharti Levad Behem, and I stuck. The famous Maram writes his Kina for the end of, in his mind, the end of learning, or the end of Jewry, which is going to take place in France. What happened to the Maram? Maram realized they wanted to come after him. He tried to flee the country. He was captured. He was put in jail. Who was his Talmud? His Talmud was the Rush. They wanted 14,000 talents of silver to ransom. The Rush began raising the ransom. And Maram says, you can't raise the ransom. It says in Gittin that you cannot give more than the worth of a captive. You can't do it. The Rush says, but you're the Gadol Ador. For you, we have to do it. He says, if you do it for me, you can do it. They're going to capture everybody. Please don't do it. He died in prison. He dies in prison. And when he died in prison, they didn't want 14,000. They wanted 10,000. And they wouldn't do it after many years he was in prison, lying in prison dead for 11 years until they finally let him out. Someone ransomed him, and he's buried his kever. The Rush was forced to run away. Where did the Rush end up going? The Rush ends up going to Spain. He was so perturbed with all of the crusades. And now France and Germany have no Svarim. And the Rush, who was the main Talmud of the Maram, and the Maram was the main Talmud of Rabbi Yechiel from Paris. So the Rush finally escapes and he goes to England, he goes to Spain, and who befriends him in Spain? One that befriended him in Spain was the Rajba. Why did Rajba befriend him? Because before this happened, they used to write Shalos Chuvas to each other. They knew each other by their letters. So the Rajba, who was the Gadol Ador in Spain, the Rush was the Gadol Ador by the Ashkenazim, they would write letters and learning back together. So the Rajba brings him in, and the Rush ends up in Spain, and we'll see what happens to the Rush and his children and grandchildren when we get to Spain. The golden era in Spain, in Spanish Jewry, was from 900 to 1500. 900 to 1500, give or take. Spain was a Spanish country. Spain wasn't just a Spanish country; it was a Catholic country from the year 589 to 711. 589 to 711, and the church was not happy with the Jews. So Spain was a Catholic country. They gave the Jews a hard time. They didn't let us keep Shabbos. They gave us a hard time with Bris Milah. There were many jobs we weren't allowed to do. They confiscated whenever there was a wealthy Jew. They confiscated everything that they needed to do. It was a big problem. So many Jews in Spain, from the year 589 to 711, when the Spanish court was Catholic, so many Jews began to run away. Many went to North Africa. Many went to Turkey. Some went to. They really couldn't. It wasn't easy to go there. Some went to France, but France is going to have the problem with the Crusades that are coming up. And Spain was full of Jewish people from the first Korban. Who put them there? Sanherib. Since the second Korban, Titus, who destroyed the second Beis Hamikdash, son of Vespasian. So with Titus, when he went to fight the Roman legions against Israel, against Bnei Israel, against the country, the Jewish people, he couldn't defeat us. The Roman legions, which were basically, you couldn't defeat them, they won everywhere they went. They had a hard time with the Jewish people. So he asked for volunteers, and Spain, Catholic Spain, just before Catholicism, Spain sent in many people to fight. And in payback to Spain that sent many people to fight, so Titus sent tens of thousands of Jews as slaves back to Spain. So we have been in Spain since the first Korban. Since the second Korban, we have been in Spain. When Spain became a Catholic country between the years of 589, 711, it wasn't easy for us. It was most difficult. In 711, the year 711, not the sword, in the year 711, the Moors, the Muslims in North Africa invaded Spain. It's amazing. Muhammad lived from 570, he passed away in 630. So now in the year 700, the Arabs, the Muslims, were such a remarkable force. Whether they knew how to fight, or they knew how to steal, or they knew how to murder, and they all did it, of course, in the name of Allah. This was all a jihad, a holy war, but they were taking over the world. So the Moors in the year 711 switched. They moved over from North Africa, which is where the Arabs were. They jumped over the Strait of Gibraltar and they invaded the Catholic Spain, and they conquered the country. It's called the Iberian Peninsula. They conquered the Iberian Peninsula. And the Spanish people they built all of their cities. They built Cordova, they built Barcelona, they built Madrid, they built Seville. And the Arabs were in charge. The Arabs took over, and for the next 400 years, we're going to call it the golden era of Spanish Jewry, because the Arabs that took over and the Catholics that were there before them always were fighting. They always were fighting. Each side needed the Jew. Why did each side need the Jew? Number one, they needed our money. A. B. We also know how to put things in order. You have an army. An army marches on its stomach. You need to order food. You need silver. You need guns. You need equipment. You need plans. And the Jewish people were the best. Not just that, the Jewish people spoke Arabic, and they spoke Spanish, and they spoke Hebrew, and they were very often the go-betweens what's going on. And since the fight was going on, the Jew always found himself in the position because each side needed the Jew. And therefore, for the next 400 years, the Jews filled all of these important spots. They were doctors, they were lawyers, they were financiers, and they had the golden era of Spain. It didn't make a difference to us if Spain was in charge, the Catholics, or the Moors, the Arabs. Each side needed us, and we learned. And during these years, these 400 years, it was called the golden era of Spanish Jewry. The Rishonim that came out, Chazdai ibn Shaprut, Shmuel HaNagid, Shlomo ibn Geviro, Rabbi Yehuda Levi the Kuzar, Rabbi Avram ibn Ezra, the Rif, the Rimagash, the Rambam, the Ramban, the Rajba, the Ran, the Rosh, the Rivash. Most of our great Rishonim all came from these 400 years. And we rose to the most remarkable power during these years because everyone needed the Jew because of our acumen, because of what we were doing. The problem was, in 1085, the reconquest, which means in English that the Catholic Spain was tired of the Arabs that threw them out, and therefore the reconquest began. King Alfonso of Castile began the reconquest, and when he began the reconquest, he needed Jews, but as he was more successful and the country fell underneath the Spanish armies, what happens then? The church moves in and the Jews are going to have problems. So this is the year 1085 in Spain. As this is going on in Spain, the reconquest, and the Jews begin to get hurt, what was going on in Eastern Europe? The Crusades were going on. That means we were being hit in Spain because of the church. We were being hit in Eastern Europe. The Crusades were going on, and it really wasn't so simple. By the year 1200, the conquest was in its height. By the year 1233, when the conquest was almost over, in 1233, the Spanish Inquisition began. In the year 1391, by this point, the Arabs were kicked out. The reconquest was finished, which means the church solidified its power on the Iberian Peninsula. In the year 1391, the first major pogrom began. It began in the city of Seville. It was the city of Seville. There was a priest who hated the Jews. He hated the Jews because most people in his church, when he asked them for a donation, they couldn't give donations because all of their money was owed to the Jews. And therefore, the priest began fomenting the mob against the Jews. And in 1391, in the city of Seville, 50,000 Jews were killed. 50,000 Jews were killed. 70 communities were wiped out. Hundreds of shuls were burned. This is in the year 1391 in Seville. In 1469, Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon, if you look at the Iberian Peninsula, so Portugal is all the way on the western side, And the rest of the Iberian Peninsula, most of it, is divided into three kingdoms. One kingdom is called Castile, one is called Aragon, and one is called Granada. So they wanted to solidify these different kingdoms into a more powerful kingdom. And therefore, in those days, when they wanted to consolidate, they simply married a king and a queen. And therefore, Queen Isabella of Castile married Ferdinand of Aragon in the year 1469. 1469. By 1478, they were powerful. They were so powerful, they kicked out every single Arab, and the Reconquista was completely finished. It was all underneath the rule of Queen Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. He was so happy, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. They were so happy that Spain now was one country, and they got rid of the Arabs. Next on their agenda, they wanted to thank God for their good luck. Now that they got rid of the Arabs, what was on the next on their checklist? What needed to be done? To get rid of the Jews. They needed to get rid of the Jews. They were convinced that the reason why God was good to them, and they consolidated Spain and they kicked out the Arabs. Why was God good to them? Because they knew that God wanted something from them, which was to get rid of the Jews, and therefore they are now going to put the Inquisition in high gear. They became king and queen. The war, which was going on for the last 250 years against the Arabs, so the coffers of the royal government were empty, and they needed to raise money. What is the easiest way to raise money? You go to the Jew. Not just that, the king and queen, now that they consolidated their power over Spain, so they of course had the upper class, the dukes and whatever you want to call them. Dukes, earls, I think that's in England. We're now in Spain, so I don't know what they're called, but I'll go with dukes and earls, because that's perfectly fine. The Spanish way of saying a duke and an earl. So they kept them. And the lower class, now that the war was over, the lower class, the peasantry, was beginning to move up. The middle class, who had money, were taking advantage of the peasantry. And who was all in the middle class? The Jews were the middle class. They did not want the middle class to become the upper class. So what did they do? They had to strip them of all of their titles, strip them of their land, strip them of all of their money, and keep them in the lower class. Also, they had to keep the peasants in their place. The peasants, so the upper class hated the Jew because they were up and coming. The middle class always likes to rise above, and therefore the higher class wanted to keep the Jew down. The peasants wanted to keep the Jew down. For what reason? Because they owed them all of their money. And therefore, from the top to the bottom, the Jew was the problem. Ferdinand and Isabella wanted to keep the country under wraps. They needed to fill their coffers with money. And therefore, where are they going to get all their money from? They're simply going to get it from the middle class, which was the Jew. They decided that all the Jewish people had to become Spanish. They wanted to convert all of them. This was God's mandate to them since they had the reconquest. This was mandated to them. And therefore, they decided they have to convert all the Jewish people. There were three different types of converts. When in Seville in 1391, there was a pogrom, they gave them a choice. What was their choice? In English, it's called fire or water. In their language, what's it called, fire or water? Baptize them as water, and fire was the auto da fe, where they burned them at the stake. So they had a choice of fire or water. So in 1391, when they killed 50,000 Jews, anyone that was not murdered or killed, they did it because they refused to convert to Christianity. There were hundreds of thousands that converted. Now that the reconquest was finished, and Ferdinand and Isabella need to keep the Jews low, they need to get rid of the middle class. Number one, because they don't want them to rise against the upper class. And they ought to protect the peasants who owed money to the middle class. So again, the Inquisition began, and they forced all Jewish people to convert. This is now the height of the Inquisition, which was in the year 1478. After Isabel and Ferdinand became king and queen, this was the height of the Inquisition. There were three types of Jewish people at the time. Some were called Anusim. Who were the Anusim? Who were the Anusim? Forced. What does forced mean? That means outwardly, they did what they needed to do, but it was always forced. Inside, they did their utmost to remain Jewish. They were called Anusim. They were called forced. There was a middle group who actually were baptized, and they acted Christian on the outside. And in the home, to a degree, they were basically Christians, but they did keep some level of Yiddishkeit. And there was a third group, which were called the conversos, or the new Christians, and they were proud. Conversos means that we were proselytized. Conversos means we listen to the gospel. We know that Jesus Christ is the Savior. We realize that we're wrong. They were the conversos, or they called themselves, or they were called the new Christians. They gave us the biggest problem. The Anusim were basically Jews, but outwardly they had to put on a facade. The middle ones were not sure what to do. They did many things outwardly, superficially, but inside they were Jewish. They did their utmost. And they were hoping one day this is going to end. The new Christians were the biggest problem. The problem with the new Christians, where they were never accepted by the original or the old Christians. The old Christians never accepted the new Christians. Why did they accept the new Christians, the old Christians? Because they were convinced that there's no way a Jew is ever going to convert. And therefore, many of these new Christians who were more Christian than the old Christians, and they would do everything possible, it didn't make a difference. They were now called the Moranos, which means Spanish for pigs. They were called pigs because the old Christians hated the new Christians, and they called them pigs. I saw a footnote, a historical footnote. One of the reasons why the new Christians were called Moranos, which means pigs, wasn't just because the old Christians hated them and never accepted them into society. One of the reasons they were called pigs was because the new Christians made it their business to eat pork as often as they could. Whenever they made soup, they made sure to take a piece of lard and throw it in. Whenever they needed an oil to bake bread, they threw a piece of lard. And therefore they were called Moranos because they took pig to a high level. So I think the reason we were called Moranos is because the old Christians hated the new Christians. But according to a footnote, they were called new Christians, Moranos, because they literally did with the pig everything they could to prove how much more Christian and Catholic they were than the old Christians. The problem, a big problem, is that many people were not Anusim. They were not new Christians. They were the old-fashioned Orthodox Jews. They refused. So many were burnt at the stake, many were killed, but many were still there, and many kept up their shuls. And therefore, along comes the Inquisition, who's trying to make sure that new Christians are not stepping out of line, and the Anusim are not stepping out of line. But whatever the problem is, the old Jews refused to convert, and they still had kosher meat, and they still had shuls, and they still were learning to the best of their ability. And therefore, the Inquisition was very unhappy because they were not successful. Why were they not successful? Because there was a tremendous underground railroad between the new Christians, the conversos, the Anusim, and the old-time Yidden that were living in Spain. And that underground railroad kept giving them kosher meat, and it kept giving them sarim, and kept giving them sidurim, kept giving them chumashim, and therefore it was a very big problem. They had to step up their Inquisition, from 1481 on, the Inquisition began a tremendous systematic war against the conversions. They would never accept the new Christians, and the church put out, I'll tell it to you in Spanish and then we'll say it in English. They put out a doctrine called the limpieza de sangre, which means the purity of blood. The old Christian said there was no such thing as a good Jew unless he's dead. Even though the new Christians did everything they could to prove that they were new Christians, everything they could, they went to church, they sang the loudest, they wore the biggest crosses, they did the biggest schmutz stuff. Even though they did all of that, The old Christian and the church refused to believe them because of this concept of limpieza de sangre, which means the purity of blood. They then put out a doctrine that the Jew is not like us. They are their own race. And even if they accept our religion, it won't make a difference because their blood is different. They called it the purity of blood. And therefore, we could never accept these new Christians. For what reason? They are different than we are. We're humans. They are a sub-human. They could never become one of us. And therefore, the Inquisition kicked into high gear because they would never accept them. If the Inquisition was smart, and you had these new Christians and these conversos, what should they have done? Accept them and just let time take its way. And all of a sudden, the same way in America and many parts of the world, we assimilate. Let us assimilate. They refused to let us assimilate. Their hatred was so strong, they would not let us assimilate because of this new concept of purity of blood, limpieza de sangre. This concept that the Jew is different. Our blood is different. We are a different type of human. We are a different race. Was used by who? Hitler, Yimach Shemo. In 1938, when he had the Nuremberg laws, what did he begin to teach the German people? That there's a different race of people called the Jew. They were vermin. They were lice. He literally convinced them that they're the same way there's a chimpanzee and an ape and a human. Hitler convinced them that the Jew is a subspecies of the Germans, of the Aryan race, and therefore we could never accept them. He did not invent this. This goes back to the Inquisition with his old Christians who could not accept the new Christians, the conversos, said we can't because they're a different type of people. And it was used by Hitler, Yimach Shemo. And one of the good things that happens when you do this is that to convince a human to kill another human, to convince a human to literally torture another human, it's very difficult. If you could convince this human that human is not really human, it's a vermin, it's a lice, it's an animal, it's much easier. Hitler got all of the Lithuanians and all of the Catholics and all the Poles to join with him, even regular people, to murder 6 million Jews. And how was it so easy? Because we weren't human, we were vermin. The Inquisition was so powerful now because everyone was willing to tell on a Jew for what reason? Because we were vermin, we were a piece of filth, and that's why they did it. It wasn't working well because the underground was too strong. The Jews that were living in Spain, the old Jews that refused to give up anything, they put them in ghettos, but there's always a way to get out of a ghetto. They restricted them. They couldn't work. They couldn't own real estate. They put all the old-time Jews, the religious Jews, behind walls, and they confiscated everything. But they were still there, and they were still, so they had to do something stronger. So they found a man who was going to become the Inquisitor General. What was his name? His name was Tomas de Torquemada. He was the most sadistic, unimaginable torturer. What he did, and he literally he wreaked havoc in the country. Anyone that would come to the Inquisition General and say this person is Jewish, this person, and you can give any proof that not even a proof, just a slander. The man was arrested. The woman was arrested, put in jail. What were some of the crimes? If they caught you having a meal Friday night, you were sent to the Inquisition. If you were caught having a matzah on Pesach, a flatbread, a cracker, you were put into the Inquisition. If you bought vegetables on Erev Pesach, we have a lot of vegetables because we have karpas and mora. You bought vegetables before Pesach, you went to the Inquisition. If you didn't have pork in your house every day, you were sent to the Inquisition. When he got you, this Torquemada, Tomas de Torquemada, he kept you in jail for a few years and he began torturing you. If you admitted that you were a Jew, if you admitted it, he hung you or decapitated you. He let you die easy. If you would not admit, he tortured you. And if you still would not admit after all the tortures, what did he do? Auto da fe. What does auto da fe mean? Act of faith. Why is it an act of faith? Because Yoshka said, If you do not accept him as God, you're going to burn in utter damnation in hell forever. So this man, Thomas de Torquemada, did everything l'shem shamayim. He did it because it's gospel, it's good news. He did it proselytize is part of their religion. And why do they do it? It's good for you. It's the best news in the world. And therefore, if you can die because you said heresy against Yashka, and now we'll burn you, what are we doing? We are now sending you to Gan Eden. And therefore, Ato Dafe, they did it for our betterment. They did it for our betterment. Whenever they arrested someone, they did not need proof. Once you were brought in the Inquisition, they took you. There was nothing you can do. The new Christians were never accepted by the old Christians. This idea of limpieza de sangre, the purity of blood, and all you had to do was knock on the door of the Inquisition and say this person did something Jewish and they were taken to jail, and eventually they were killed. The lower class loved it. You can borrow as much money you want from a Jew. Borrow whatever you want. When you can't pay it back, what do? You just go and say, I saw him at Challah on Friday night. I saw him buy grains and vegetables before Pesach. I saw him light candles on Friday afternoon, which was Neros. And all you got to do, they took them. It was so palpable to all of the new Christians and the Anusim. A knock on the door literally meant that you were dead. A knock on the door. They walked around tittering because of this. I just want to tell you, once I mentioned the knock on the door, the same thing happened in Germany. When you were hiding as a Jew, and you were in someone's bar and hiding, were you in someone's fake wall, and the Gestapo was outside, a knock on the door did what? It gave you a heart attack. A heart attack, a knock on the wall. All you needed was a knock on the wall. So during these years of Inquisition, and many Jews lived as new Christians, a knock on the door literally sent them into a heart attack. Dr. Nader has a son whose name is Betzalel. Betzalel made Aliyah with Dr. Nader's daughter. They live in Israel. He served his time in the army. He was a sharpshooter, and now he has two sons in the army. He has two sons in the army. I was speaking to him, and he lives in a very nice community, a nice building. Everyone's friendly. Everyone has children or grandchildren. And in Israel, which is very beautiful about Israel, you live in a building with other people. Everyone has an apartment. They go back and forth between apartments. Children, grandchildren, they knock, they don't knock. It's one big house. It's like a bungalow colony. Many areas in Israel are like a bungalow colony. They're the same age, the same ideas, the same level, and it's a beautiful thing. So he said to me that in his building, which is a very friendly building, people would come, children, grandchildren, if they're thirsty, they'd come into the fridge to get something to drink. They'd come to me or my wife, wipe my nose, get me a cookie. And it was beautiful. That's the way Jewish people should live it. It might be a little bit too Hamish, but it's very nice. He said that when his two sons are in the army and there's a knock on the door, he has a heart attack. It used to be a knock on the door meant that a neighbor's coming. They want to borrow a bottle of wine. They want to borrow sugar. A little kid leaves the bathroom. Once in a while, someone knocks on the door because they wanted a shekel. There's a knock on the door now. What does he do? He runs to the other end of the house and says, go away. What is he afraid of? In Israel, when someone dies, a soldier dies, they send the rabbi from the Rabbanut, they send the high commanding officer, they send someone from the platoon, they knock on the door with the most somber look on their face, and you know immediately that your son or your daughter was killed. He's afraid to open the door. Too many times in our history, whether during the Inquisition, a knock on the door meant that someone told on you, or in Hitler's time, a knock on the door from the Gestapo would send you to have a heart attack, or now in Israel, a knock on the door from someone from the army will give you a heart attack. Knock on doors are not easy. Inquisition was the hardest on women. More women were burned at the stake than men. More women were arrested than men. Why was it harder on the women? because the man woke up in the morning and he was a converso. He was a new Christian. And what did he do? Whatever the goyim were wearing, whatever was the fashion, he wore it. He was a doctor, a lawyer. He was a new Christian. He went to work. I'm sure he had a big yashka around his neck. He had a big cross around his neck. He spoke fluent Spanish. I'm sure he memorized all of their Lord's prayers, and he went to work. I'm sure he cursed like all of the other ones at work, and he watched the same stupid, filthy movie that everyone at work, and he fit into society. What was a woman doing at home? Take care of the kids and trying to do what? At some age, what do you got to teach children? Moda'ani or brachos. Imagine teaching your children Moda'ani, but telling them only in the house. Only in this house can you do this. You can't do this with a neighbor. Imagine teaching them Shema Yisrael only in the family, never outside. The women of the house, in each of these homes, they all had something called the special knife. What was the special knife? It was used for shechita. You couldn't use it when you cut your other food. You couldn't use it when you had to cut up salad. It was a knife put in a special hidden place that was a shechita knife. Whether they used it on birds or on animals, it was the shechita knife. And almost every one of these homes had a shechita knife. They also knew that whenever mommy baked bread, what did she do? Took off a little piece and burned it. They also knew that very often on Friday, mommy would go down to the basement, go into a locked room, in a huge earthenware vase, light candles. She tried her utmost. Sometimes she had to have pig in the house because they all had slaves and they all had helpers in the house. She tried her utmost to keep the house kosher. She tried to raise her children with some small amount that you're different than the other children. And therefore, when the slaves in the house and the maids in the house and the help in the house who were old Christians saw something even slightly amiss in the house, who was to blame? The women. And therefore, the women had the brunt of the Inquisition more than the men. More women were burned than men. More women were arrested than the men. The favorite name of a Yiddish woman was what? Esther. Why Esther? Because Esther was the first hidden converso crypto Jew. Esther was the first. She lived a double life. No one ever caught her. She was only caught when she got rid of Haman, whatever you want to say, but the original crypto Jew, hidden Jew, was Esther. And therefore, Esther was the hero of all of these women in Spain during the Inquisition. The Seder was never observed on the 15th of Nisan, when we observe it. When did they have their Seder? 2 or 3 days later. They never had it the right time. Yom Kippur was never on Yud Tishri. When was Yom Kippur? 13th or 14th. The only fast day that they kept was Tiny Esther. And they kept it for 3 days, like she did. 3 days. The only thing they kept on the Jewish calendar was Tiny Esther. If you want to see a little bit about the atrocities in your shul Kinnos, it's on page 139. 139 in the shul, it's Lamed Aleph. If you have an art scroll, it's on page 292. This kina is a general kina about all of the people that are murdered and tortured. Inquisition was so bad, they walked in fear. They didn't know what to do with themselves. Anyone can tell on them, and there was no proving innocent. The only thing is either you admitted it and you cut off your head, or you didn't admit it and they burnt you in a gruesome way, but there was no getting out of it. So it says in the keynote, I'm just going to read parts of it. It just shows you what the state of mind, whether it was Hitler Germany, or whether it was the Inquisition, or whether it was the Crusade, of all of the times in history when we were afraid of that knock on the door, and literally they were killing us in the street. Are we part of it? In O Zion, it says, Lo niyachel imi. We still place our trust in him, even if God is gonna cause us to be killed. Naritz l'morav, and we're still going to revere his awesomeness. Heichin Hashem zevach hiktish kruyal. HaKadosh Baruch Hu prepared us as if we are korbanos. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu now is going to slaughter the finest. If you turn the page to Oz Yud, Yachad latevach uvalu katlaim uvdaim. We were led to the slaughter like lambs and kids. Gemuleich mechalav atikem yishadayim. Children that just finished nursing from the mother, they were killed. Kavasha avrachamav l'zevach, and our father, the human father, literally would hold back his rachmanis. Yiladav hishlim kikarim l'tevach, because their children were being thrown to be killed. Hechin lebanav matbeach. Mi yishme osmem mi yishme velo yitma. Who can hear and not be, so moving and not shed tears? Haben nishchat va'av karei kriyishma. The son is being shechted by the church. He's being burnt at the auto da fe. And what is the father doing? He's saying kriyishma for his son. Mira kazosu mishama. How could you see this and not be silent? It's Osamach, Sup v'ha'emu, Baruch Harucha. The mother saw their children being tormented. V'nafsha hishlima latevach, Harucha karcha, she saw her children literally spread out and shechted like we do with animals before a meal. And it says, Aim habanim smechad, with all that being done, it didn't make a difference, we were happy. Ba'os tzadi, u'tumor mizrak dam, in the Beis Hamikdash, when they shechted a korban, they used to accept the blood in a klisheris. One of the avodas, after they shechted, they collected the blood. It says here, it's more mizrak dam instead of the Beis Hamikdash accepting it in a kli. Over here, kibla b'knafeh tisapes. Here, the mother received the blood in the hem of her skirt as her children were being shechted. Kati libi mitzo tochen inyanav. We're trying to understand why this happens. Yadati ani tzedek v'yoshedinav. We understand whatever God does is right. V'tov Hashem liyirei Elokim, and halavai, God will be good to all those that sanctify their lives, l'shem shamayim. It says here, children are being shechted. And when children are being shechted, they yelled out Shema Yisrael. And the father and the mother yelled out Shema Yisrael. And they used their garment to take the blood as if it was a korban in the Beis Hamikdash, where they received the blood. And it says here, even though we don't always understand the ways of God, we accept it and we hope that our children that gave their lives to Shem Shemayim. And it says over here in the Kinnos, even our children, before they can speak, and they only knew something called Kriya Shema, they were led to be killed by the Inquisition and by the first Korban, second Korban, and the Crusades. Herod's Buxbaum has a son-in-law whose name is Yoshua Koenig. Yoshua Koenig, by the way, is 6'2", 6'3". He's built like a tank. He happens to be a rabbi. He really is smicha. He's also part of Hatzalah. Correct. And he fights in Israel. He doesn't just fight, he's a major. He's not just a major, he leads a commando unit. I know you always hear stories of some Israeli soldiers that go in first. They go in behind enemy lines, they go in before the tanks and before the armored personnel carriers. He's one of those, and it's not just him, all of his soldiers underneath him. I don't know if there's 20 or 30. We're not talking about a large brigade of hundreds. These go in secretly at night before an operation for their secret mission. The war's been going on for 315 days. He's been fighting for 218. That means he has 5 children. That means either he's so good or his unit is so good. Even though he's a father of numerous children, he's been fighting for 2/3, 218 out of the 315 days of the battle he's been fighting. I asked him, I didn't ask him if he saw soldiers die. I didn't ask him if he had men die. I assume the answer is an affirmative. It just has to be. I asked him what was the hardest thing for him. He says he was on a mission, a secret mission, before dawn, and another commander was doing another mission a kilometer away, and he was heard on his on his earpiece that the other commander is calling out for any other soldiers in the vicinity because they were ambushed. They were pinned down. So he responds, Yoshua Koenig responds and says, we're not far. Give me your exact location and we'll be there in 5 minutes. He collects his men that did not yet go on their mission and they run. They're in great shape. Even though they're carrying 50 pounds of equipment, they're in great shape. Yiddish soldiers are calling out for help. So they make a beeline to the section. And when he gets there, he sees that there's an ambush. The previous commander sent some of his soldiers in, and as a few went in, more Arabs than they expected were in the vicinity, and they pinned them down. Within 3 minutes, Yoshua figured out he's done this many times, and he was speaking to the other commander. Each one took up a side, and they're trying to get rid of the terrorists. And it's hard because there's an empty field between the terrorists and them, and there's heavy shooting. And Yoshua, from his vantage point, sees an Israeli soldier was shot, and he was bleeding profusely. He couldn't go simply save him because they were pinned down. He couldn't call for a tank. Tanks were far away. Armored personnel carriers were far away. Someone had to save him. Yoshua Koenig, even though he's a commander, he's a major, he also is in charge of, in his area where he lives, in Beit Shemesh, he also is a Hatzalah member. He is not a medic in the army. He is a sniper, a fighter in the army. In civilian life, he is part of Hatzalah. So he says to the other commander, you have a soldier lying in the field, he's going to bleed out. So the commander says, what am I supposed to do? Arabs are surrounding him. I don't even have a medic right now. My medic was shot. What am I supposed to do? So Yoshua Koenig says, do you mind if I try? I am Hatzalah. Maybe I can staunch the bleeding. He says, whatever you need to do. Yoshua runs over there. He drags him behind the burnt car. So he's no longer being shot at. It's a miracle that he wasn't shot. You know, he cuts part of the uniform, sees where he's shot, and he takes some of his medicines, the sulfur, the bandages, and tries to staunch the bleeding. And it's not going that well. He needs to be evacuated. They're not going to evacuate. They can't evacuate. There's no helicopters coming. There's no armored personnel. There's no tanks. They were in there alone. This is way in front of the front lines. These are the commando units that go in as the vanguard. He tries his utmost, and he looks at the soldier, and the soldier looks at Yeshua and says, I'm going to die. Yeshua said, very possible. The soldier then says to him, can you do me a favor, Taseli Tova? I want to say Shema and Vidoy, and I'm not sure how to do it. Yeshua, besides being a great soldier and a wonderful husband and father and a great medic, happens to be a rabbi. True. So he says Vidoy with him, Shema and Vidoy, and he dies in his arms. And they finish the mission. They pick up the body, they kill the terrorists, and they go back. And Yoshua says to the other commander, I know it's your job to call up his mother and go visit her that he died. But if you don't mind, he died in my hands. Would you mind if I went? I would not volunteer for that. I would not. I don't know if anyone here would volunteer for that. He volunteered to go to the mother and tell her that the son died. So when he gets back, he calls up the mother and says, I'm coming. He knocks on the door. And right away, when there's a knock on the door, as we said, it's the most nerve-wracking. It'll give you a heart attack if a soldier knocks on your door. And she starts crying profusely. The mother starts crying profusely. And he says he died a hero, whatever. I don't know what words to use to try to mollify or try to play. I don't have the words. I'm sure every case is different, and she's crying hysterically. And he's trying, and others died underneath him, and he's done this before, and she just is completely hysterical. A little bit more, and there's no more or less. And he says to her, something is bothering you. What's bothering you? So she said, he wasn't kolkach dati. I don't know if he said Shema or Vidoi. I don't know how fast he died. You said he was shot by a sniper. Did he have a chance to say Vidoi and Shema? So Yoshua said, he was hit by a sniper, fatally. I went to try to help him. And don't tell me he doesn't know Shema, because he does. And when he looked at me and said, am I going to die? I said, probably yes. He said to me, can we please say Shema and Vidoi together? And we did. He died after he said Shema and after Vidoi. Yeshua said to me, the mother gave the biggest smile. And she said to me 3 words, Nichamtani, Nichamtani, Nichamtani. I can show you kina after kina, where the Jewish people were being slaughtered. They were being killed systematically, shechted, burned at the stake. And in the Kinnos it says, what would the mother do when her son was literally being shechted? She used her skirt to collect the blood. She would sit with her son and she would say, I taught you Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, let's say it together. A father would see his son being burnt at the stake. And what would he say with his son? Shema Yisrael. It says in the Kina, please the Kadosh Baruch Hu, who can see these things and not shed tears? There is no nation in the world like the Jewish people, please God, accept all of these korbanos. In 1492, the Inquisition was not winning. It was losing. It was losing because there were too many Jews in ghettos that were from. And the Jews in ghetto that were from were sneaking meat, and they were sneaking sidurim, and they were sneaking different paraphernalia to all of the new conversos and the new Christians. And the new Christians were having a hard time because the old Christians wouldn't accept them. And therefore they didn't know what to do. So along comes the Alhambra decree, the edict of expulsion. On January 2nd, 1492, by then the reconquest was fine. On March 31st, 3 months later, they were so sick and tired of the Jews, not the new Christians. They were going to stay. Inquisition was going to take care of them. Who were they tired of? Who was the biggest thorn on their side? The firm Jews that refused to yield. The firm Jews that refused to bend. And they were not part of the Inquisition. They openly admitted that they were Jewish. And they were living in ghettos. And they had kosher meat. And they had kosher sidurim. And they had shuls. It was a small ghetto. They tried to starve them to death. They didn't let them do anything. They couldn't have a profession. But there were many Jews that were not conversos, that were not new Christians. And they were not even anusim. And they were the ones that were feeding information and food and sidurim to the rest of the Jews in Spain. And therefore the Inquisition came up with an idea. And they said the only way we're going to get these new Christians and these conversos on our side is to do what? Is to get rid of all of these Orthodox Jews. And therefore, what are we going to do? We're going to have an expulsion from Spain. And therefore, they signed in a castle in the city of, it's called Alhambra Castle. They decided to kick every Jew out, which was now called the Edict of Expulsion. It came out on August 2nd, 1492. August 2nd, 1492, which in Hebrew was Tisha B'Av. In Hebrew was Tisha B'Av. I have over here the Abarvanel. Abarvanel was the finance minister of King Ferdinand and Isabella. He was a finance minister. And I have his writings. He writes, you can read it. It's unbelievable. He says, I worked for the king and the queen for the last many years as a finance minister, and I made them, I can't tell you how much money. They came out with the expulsion, the Alhambra decree, where every single person that's Shomer Shabbos, everyone that is from, needs to leave the country. I went, I pleaded, I begged, I offered money. I did whatever I could. And I almost had the King Ferdinand on my side. Vahamalka omedet al yamino l'sitno, but the queen refused to do it. Wherever it went out, people were crying. We're not going to convert. We're not going to become new Christians. 300,000 Jews on Tisha B'Av got on boats to leave the country. These are not the new Christians. These are not the conversos. These are not the Anusim. These were the firm people. They've been there, by the way, since the first war and second war. There must have been 1 million Jews in Spain. 300,000 are left. He says, we didn't know where we were going. We were being sold as slaves. They're confiscating all of our money. So many Jews died either because the boat was not seaworthy or the captain simply threw them overboard. He writes and says of the 300,000, I have no idea how many ever arrived. Barvanel. Christopher Columbus was supposed to leave in the beginning of August. His boat was postponed. When did he leave? August 3rd. Why did he leave August 3rd? He couldn't get out of the port. Why couldn't he get out of the port? Because August 2nd, every Jew was leaving. And therefore he couldn't leave when he wanted to leave. He had to leave a few days later, August 3rd, 1492, because all the Jews were leaving. It's quite interesting. Many people think Christopher Columbus was a Marrano. Whether he was or not, which is a debate, and there's many books on it, many people on his boat, the guy that looks at the stars, the quartermaster, they were definitely Jewish. They have notes that they were taking on the ship. Many of the notes are written in Hebrew, which means many people that escaped with Columbus were these Marranos that wanted to leave. How unbelievable is it that when the end of Jewish life in Spain ends on Tisha B'Av 1492, the day that it ends, a new world literally opens up. This new world is called America, South America. The new world opens up for Jews. And on that original boat of Columbus were Marranos that were escaping. The hashgacha simply is unbelievable. Where were they supposed to go? Where were the people supposed to go? So many went to South America. Many went to South America. Many went to North America. Many went to Turkey. Many went to Constantinople. I really don't have time. I was going to speak about the Netherlands, but I'm going to have to skip the Netherlands today. We'll do it a different time. They didn't know where to go. Many did go to South America. They went to South America for the simple reason because Columbus was taken. That was a new world. There was no church. There was nothing that was there. Half of Mexico was founded by Marranos. They went to a new place which was called New Mexico. New Mexico, by the way, was New Spain. And that's where they went. Jews went there. Their first shul was built in Brazil in 1636. Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in Manhattan, 1644, was built by them. They went all over South America, the Jewish people. The problem was wherever they went to South America, what happened? Church followed them. And the same thing that happened in Spain and Portugal, the same thing happened in wherever the church went, they began killing them. The Jews had to go underground. There are a few places in South America where the Dutch took over. One was called, it's written Reciffe, it's pronounced Hesephe, where the Jewish people ended up, and they were under the Dutch rule, and they flourished in the most remarkable way. The problem was the Portuguese came after 20 years, and they overtook the city, and they wanted to murder every Jew, burn them at the stake. The Dutch said, we're not letting you take over the city until you get free passage to the Jewish people. And these Jewish people that were left Spain, left Portugal to Mexico, church follows them. They go to a place called Hesephe, which is under Dutch command. They get kicked out of there. The judge give them a boat, and they end up going to New York, and they found a shul in New York, Sherish Yisrael, one of the first shuls in Manhattan, were by these Marranos. Believe it or not, if you go to South America and you go off the coast of Nassau, there happens to be a cemetery for pirates, a pirate cemetery. And you're gonna see that many pirates on their matzeva have Magen Davids. I don't know if the percentage was half, a third, or a quarter, but many pirates were Jews. They flew a skull and crossbones and a Magen David. Why were so many pirates Jews? Because they hated the Spanish and the Portuguese. Any ship that sailed with the Spanish or Portuguese flag, these pirates went against and they tried to kill as many as you want. There's a famous tefillah that we use in shul, which is called Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre, by the way, has nothing to do with Yom Kippur. Nothing. It is a very haunting tune. I think it might be one of the more famous tunes in the world for Jewish people. I don't care if you're from, you're not from, everyone sings the Kol Nidre. It has nothing to do with Yom Kippur. Absolutely nothing. What does it have to do with? If you make a neder, you have to keep your neder. There's 613 mitzvahs. So some rabbis might want to say it's trying to teach you the power of speech. You're going to be davening for 25 hours power of speech. It doesn't cut it. Kol Nidre is the most powerful tefillah. Why is it the most powerful tefillah? And why is it part of our davening? All of the Anusim, and all of the new Christians, when they finally got out, and they come to shul to daven, they didn't know how to daven because they were in churches for the last 10, 20, 30 years of their life. They walked into church and they sang the loudest. They know the Lord's Prayer. And now they're coming into a shul and daven, and every single time for the last 20, 30, 40 years, a Christian bumped into them on the street. What did they say? They spoke about Yeshua. They spoke about the New Testament. They only said bad things about God and about the Jews. And now they want to daven. How many times did they say the Lord's Prayer where they offer and they promise their allegiance to Yeshua? And they're now coming to shul. And therefore, who wrote this prayer called Kol Nidre? It was written for the Moranos. At the end of Kol Nidre, what do we say? V'yishiv shomala, v'yishiv shomata. Anu matirim lispalel im ha'avar yanim. Who does it mean? Kadosh Baruch Hu, please let us daven for those that sin. We're now davening for and with the Moranos, and that is the source of Kol Nidre. Unbelievable. Okay, I spoke about the Inquisition in very broad strokes. And I didn't speak about the Netherlands. We'll do that a different time, how they saved so many Jews. I would like to speak to you now about a smaller picture of the Inquisition, but in not such broad strokes. Spain in the 1300s was one of the most powerful countries in the world. They only really fall in 1588 when they went to invade England. Why did they go invade England? But England was Protestants and Spain was Roman Catholic. And they had a famous war. The Spanish Armada was defeated in 1588. And until then, Spain was very powerful. And all of the islands around Spain were all Spanish property. Even the New World, New Mexico and Brazil, and the Jews had to go to Nassau, and the Jews had to go to Barbados, and they had to go to Cuba. They had to keep running ahead of the Inquisition. Spain was a very powerful country. So one of the small islands off of Spain is called Majorca. Majorca, one of the small islands, beautiful island. And in 1391, when the Inquisition began in Spain, 1391, so it also happened in Majorca. And in 1391, there were 3,500 Jews in Spain also came from the first, second Corban Beis Hamikdash. There's 3,500 Jewish people in Majorca, and 370 were killed in 1391. And all the other Jews were either forced to be baptized or burned in altar dafe. They burned many, every other one converted in 1391. In 1435, they came again, the Inquisition, to find any remaining Jews. And supposedly they arrested a few hundred, and the island in 1435 of Majorca was Judenrein, which means that the expulsion in 1492 did not apply because there were no Jews that were there. There's a man in Israel There's a man in Israel whose name is Yosef Wallace. Yosef Wallace became famous 20 years ago because he began a movement called Arachim. What does Arachim mean? Value. In the end of Sefer Vayikra, the last parsha is Erech. A person says, I value. So this man, Yosef Wallace, began an organization called Arachim. He began Arachim, which is a kiruv organization, because in his mind, every single Jew has a value. He, Yosef Wallace, who began Arachim, was raised not from. He went off to there. And when he came back, he began an organization called Arachim. If you want to go online, Arachim has books, it has Svarim, it has articles, it has a book, Arachim. And he was once, when he became from again, he was sitting with his father. His father's name is Yehuda Aryeh Wallace, and his father was from. His father survived the Holocaust. So when he became from, and he began the organization Arachim, and his father had so much nachas from him, they were one shmuzim, and Yosef Wallace, who's in charge of Arachim, he's living now, began speaking with his father 25 years ago. His name was Yehuda Aryeh Wallace. He went through the Holocaust. And he once said to his father, how in the world did you survive the Holocaust? And he also asked him, how'd you meet mom? He says, I'll tell you what happened. I was sent to Auschwitz. And one day when I was on a work detail, a Jew that was being brought to the gas chamber threw me a little bag. Threw me a little bag. So I took the bag. I was hoping it had a piece of potato or a piece of bread. I put it in the pocket of my uniform and I went to my work detail. When I came home at night, and I thought everyone was sleeping in the barracks, I opened up the little bag that this Jew, on his way to the gas chamber, flipped to me. And inside was a small pair of tefillin. I was in seventh heaven. Yehuda Aryeh Wallace says I was in seventh heaven. I haven't put tefillin on in years. And now on my way to work, the Jew on the way to the crematoria flips me a bag of tefillin. Right before roll call, I put them on. They were small. I wasn't embarrassed of any other inmates. No one's going to tell on me. I put them on. And as they're on my arm and my head, the capo walks in. And he sees me wearing the tefillin. The capo knew exactly what it was. He dragged me outside and he called the commandant. They ripped off my tefillin from my arm and my head. And they called roll call, and there was a gallows that was always up, and they put my neck into the gallows, and they announced publicly this Jew was found wearing these, and they hold up the tefillin. The commandant says to Yehuda Aryeh Wallace, before we kill you, before we hang you, do you have any last request? I don't know, by the way, where this comes from. Before the condemned man, you're asking for one last request. They asked him, you want one last request? And he says, yes, my last request is to put on the talis and tefillin, and I can die like a yid. Commandant is fuming. He is so angry. He throws them at him, and he puts them on. And he tightens the noose around his neck, and he's about to hang him. And he looks out, and everyone was there at appel, which is the roll call. They even had some women called because they were going to make a spectacle of this man, which means sometimes they hang you, and right before you die, they put you back, hang you, put you back. They were going to make a big deal of this guy, Yehuda Aryeh Wallace. Everyone was watching. And he saw tears beginning to be shed by many of the people watching. And he said to them, why are you crying? If I'm dying like a yid, if I'm dying with my tefillin, you should be happy. It means that we won, and we are going to win. Remember this picture forever of a yid wearing tefillin being hanged by the Nazi animal. The commandant was so angry, he took him down, while with his tefillin on his head and he put him in the center square, and he took two rocks, and he tied him to his hands, 2 rocks, and he says, I'm now going to beat you. They had these plastic truncheons, and he says, I'm going to beat you 25 times on your head. And if you let go of the rocks, I'm going to beat you until you die. The capo, who's a yid, who told on him, said to him, drop the rocks now. Because no one ever survived holding the rock with 25 beatings on your head with the truncheon. You're just going to suffer for nothing. Drop him and he'll shoot you. He says, I won't let him win. I will not let him win. I was holding the rocks. They beat me 25 lashes on my head and they left me for dead, but I would not drop the rocks. Commandant leaves. 3 or 4 Jews took his body. They saw that he had a faint pulse. They were convinced he was dead. They brought him back to the barracks, put him in a corner, covered him with blankets, tried to give him a little bit of food. 2.5 months later, he's liberated. He goes to Feldafing DP camp. Klosenberger Rebbe was there. In the camp, a woman walks over to him and she says, Yehuda Arye Wallace, I'd like to marry you. He says, you don't even know me. She says, I know you very well. I saw you holding the stones. I saw you with the noose around your neck. I saw how you wouldn't give in. There's not too many Jews left on this planet. I don't know how many died. At that point, they did not have the number 6 million. There's very few of us in Feldafing. You, of all the Jews that are left in this world, I also have tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. I survived. I'd like to go to Bayis Dem with you. Will you please marry me? They went to the Klosenberger Rebbe. Klosenberger Rebbe said, this is the first wedding, Yiddish wedding I've done in years. He took a pen, he took a paper, he wrote a ksuva. Eisenhower was there, General Eisenhower. They took the, when they jump out of the plane, the parachute of an American, they made a chuppah. They made her some type of a wedding dress with a parachute from an American pilot. And the Klosenberger Rebbe wrote the ksufa and married them on the spot. So Yehuda Arye Wallace tells his son when he comes back, when he went off the derech and he had arachim, he told him, this is how I met your mom. Yosef Wallace, after he hears the story from his father, Taka looks at his father and says, Dad, how did you do it? If the capo said you're going to die anyway, how do you have the chutzpah to put the tefillin on? How do you have the chutzpah to say to the commandant you want to be hung with the tefillin? How do you hold those stones, and begin lashed 25 times? How in the world did you do it? So listen to what Yehuda Arye Wallace tells his son Yosef Wallace. He says there's an island off of Spain called Mallorca. Mallorca now has, 7,500 Jews. They all have, of the 7,500 Jews that are there, they all come from 15 families, and they all have the same last name. One of the more prominent families in Mallorca is the Wallace family. 15 names, 15 families, a lot of intermarriage, 3,500 Jews, and they go back to the first, second Beis Hamikdash. In 1391, when the first terrible pogrom from the Inquisition began in Seville, they moved over to Mallorca. They killed more than 10% of the Jewish population, and they baptized the rest. That was in 1391. In 1435, they came back, and they either killed, baptized, burned the rest of them, and they thought that Mallorca was Judenreich. In the year 1688, all of those Jews that they thought were Judenreich were held as anusim, as conversos, and in 1688, there were still a few thousand of these conversos on the island. They didn't know much because they were really cut off. They did not know much. In the year 1688, 37 went out on Yom Kippur to the fields, to the gardens, and they wanted to daven on Yom Kippur. They had a sitter, one sitter in 1688, which the Rav of the town, HaRav Yaakov had. Rav Yaakov was a businessman, and he used to go back and forth on his boats, and he would smuggle back some Sidurim, he would smuggle back some other artifacts of Yiddishkeit, maybe a pair of tefillin or two or a chumash or two. So there were a bunch of conversos that were underground on the same, and the Rav was the Rabbi Rafal. Well, he knew more than anybody else. So in 1688, they were davening in the field, 37 people. They were informed upon. The Inquisition jumped on them. They always wore black. Gestapo also always wore black. They arrested them and kept them in jail for 3 years. In 1691, Of the 33 that they attacked and they found, many admitted, and they also arrested many more Jews that were part of the family. In the center square in 1691, on this island of Majorca, it's called Gumila Square. They built bleachers 9 levels high amongst the whole square. 30,000 Majorcans came to watch. 30,000. They don't need bullfighting. They don't need soccer, football. 30,000 came to watch the spectacle. They had close to a few hundred Jews that they arrested. In Spain, they were called Moranos. In Mallorca, they were called Xuetas. Xueta in Catalan, which is the dialect of Spanish that they speak in Mallorca. So in Catalan, their dialect, Xueta means pigs. So they weren't called Moranos, they were called Xuetas. Xuetas, by the way, were never allowed to intermarry. Even though there was no longer Jews and they were all free, but the Xueta family, and there were thousands of them, had to live in their own ghetto and they were never allowed to intermarry. Shulchan Aruch paskins about the Xuetas. They don't need to be converted when they become Jewish. Why not? Never intermarry. They would never accept it. They're still called Xuetas. To this day, they're called Xuetas. They had a few hundred of them. Inquisition had many admit their guilt. And when they admit their guilt, they just hang them. They just cut off their heads. They'd make it easy for them. There were 3 Jews that refused to admit their Jews. There was one woman who was 45 years old. Her name was Catalina Tarongi. She was one of the 3 that would refuse to admit her guilt. She admitted she was Jewish and she wants to be Jewish. It was her son that informed on her and this other group that went to daven in the field. A younger brother, whose name was Rafael Baruch Benito, he was 25 years old, and there was a rabbi, HaRav Yaakov. They refused to give in. They put on them, when they were going to burn them, they had a uniform. I forgot the name, SAN something. It was a green uniform, and they had devils, they had demons, they had whatever signs of terrible hell that they can think of, with the dunce cap and these ugly looking green frocks. They put them on, and they put a metal muzzle on their mouth because they spoke so harshly against Yashka, and they built the auto da fe to burn them. And as they're bleeding them down, the priest, the minister, keeps saying, repent, repent. You don't have to burn. We can kill you easily. Repent, repent. Everyone wants to hear that Yashka is a true God. And then the priest got to 30,000 spectators to yell, repent, repent, repent. I don't know what it's like when you go to a concert or you go, to an Olympic event or a football game, and all 50,000 people yelling. 30,000 Catholics are yelling to these 3, repent, repent, repent. Your God is nothing. Yashka is the God, repent. And they refused. She saw her brother, Rafael Benito, Baruch, beginning to waver. Big difference if they cut off your head, or they burn you at the stake. Burning at the stake is supposed to be the most painful death in the world. She saw her brother began to waver. She yelled to her brother, Rafael, don't give in. They can burn our bodies, they cannot burn our spirit. Don't give in. They can burn your body, they can't burn your soul. Do not ever give in. Don't do it. The name of the rabbi was Rafael. And he didn't give in because when he heard this woman, Catalina Tarongi, yell at her brother, whose name was Rafael Baruch, don't do it. Rafael, don't do it. He also accepted he's not going to do it. And they burnt him at the stake. His name was Rafael Wallace. His name was Rafael Wallace. And therefore, when Yehuda Aryeh Wallace tells his son over why he survived in the Holocaust with the stones and the beating, he said, it's obviously in our blood that we always get good at Shem Shemayim, and we fight to the end. Rafael Wallace, his family is still living in Mallorca. They're still called the Xuetas. And Yosef Wallace, who began Arachim, every year or 2, he goes back there. And there's only 15 families. He knows them all. And they all know that his father was burned at the stake in 1691, HaRav Yaakov Wallace, and he goes back and he teaches them, and it's just remarkable. Yehuda Arya Wallace, when his son said, and how did our healthy Zaidi Yaakov Wallace do it? There's a sefer called the Arvei Nachal. Arvei Nachal was written in the year 1780 by Reb David Eibschitz. And he says, not Yonason, David Eibschitz. And he writes in the sefer, we say every single day, you have to give your life. When Rabbi Akiva was being killed, they were using metal barbed wire to rip out his flesh. His Talmidim said to him, Ad Khan, how much more can you take? How much more can you take? And he says, I daven every day that I'm willing to give my life. And I'll be more than happy to do it. And literally, he died smiling. And the heavenly voice comes out and says, Yatzasa nishmascha, be'echad, and your mezuma l'chai olam haba. He writes and says, how was Rabbi Akiva able to do that? He writes and says the most remarkable thing. He says every single person, every yid, is made up of a guf and neshama. A guf and a neshama. The neshama is haylik, the neshama is not physical, and the body is physical. And every single day of our lives, we have a fight that goes on between our neshama and our guf. What does our neshama want to do? Our neshama wants to do mitzvahs, wants to learn. What does the guf want to do? The guf wants to eat. Yom Kippur is one day that we're supposed to subjugate our body, and our neshama takes over. And you're like a malach on Yom Kippur, which is why you can say Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuso outlined like a malach, because our guf has been subjugated. Our neshama takes over. So the Arvei Nachal says that someone that is killed al Kiddush Hashem, and their thoughts that they want to give up their bodies to Shem Shemayim, so their bodies no longer are functioning. What keeps them going? Their neshama. And the Sefer Arvei Nachal writes and says, Lachein enu margish hatzar. He doesn't feel the pain. Rak tanug. He only feels enjoyment. Kemo shehu began Eden. Va'adarabba, ishlo tanug yoser. Me'achar shadavar hahu shechashak tamid. You always wanted to be Mekadeh Shem Shemayim, and therefore kol od sheyisuri avigasu gedolim. The more they think they're causing you pain, yoser yigdal ve'yoser yisaneg al ta'anugim shehanefesh shelcha ola lamala v'haguf batal. I hope I never have to go through this for anyone, but that's what he writes. Yeah. And therefore, Yehuda Arya Wallace told his son, that is what happened. The Kloisenberger Rebbe, who married them in Feldefame, he got to Auschwitz. They ripped him off the train. I don't know how long they were on the train for. You don't eat on the train. I don't know what the train ride was most terrible. And they brought him into the barracks. It was a Friday morning. They brought him into the barracks on Friday morning. He had nothing to eat for a few days. And everyone went out because they called him to go eat. And he wouldn't eat. He wouldn't eat treif. He wouldn't eat any treif. He's in the barrack alone. All the other people on the train were somewhere. They were giving them some type of food. I don't know if you call it food or gruel, whatever. And he was in the barrack, and he began crying hysterically. He says to Kadosh Baruch Hu, I understand it's the Holocaust. I understand the Nazis want to kill me. I understand that. And I know that the neshama is yours, but I can't give them my goof. I cannot eat treif, but I am actually starving to death. We got here on Friday morning. It is now Shabbos. I have nothing to eat, and I'm starving to death, but I'm not going to eat treif. And as he's crying, and he's trying to start davening, Shabbos davening, but he just can't do it. He's crying too hysterically. He doesn't know what's going to be because he won't eat treif. There's a knock on the barrack door, and someone walks in. And the one that walks in looks at him and says, are you Yekusiyu Yehuda Halberstam, the Kloisenberger Rebbe? The Rebbe didn't know what to say. Why didn't he know what to say? Because the Gestapo was always looking for the Rebbeim, always looking for the rabbis. He didn't know what to say to him. So this man said to him, I was a chassid of the Kishinever Rebbe, who's your uncle. And he sent me here to give something to you. So at that point, when he mentioned the Kishinever Rebbe, that he was a Talmud by the Kishinever, who was a Kloisenberger Rebbe's uncle, he said, yes, I'm the Kloisenberger Rebbe. He says, this is a present from your uncle. And he threw over a bag, and in the bag was a loaf of bread and a jar of jam. Kloisenberger Rebbe couldn't understand because his uncle, the Kishinever Rebbe, died years ago. He had no idea how he got hold of this bread and this jam. But he made Kiddush, which you could on bread. And he saved some of it for the day meal, some of it for the afternoon meal. And he said to himself, I can see God even in the middle of Auschwitz. If God saved me today, he'll save me for as long as I'm here. And for the next year and a half, the Kloisenberger Rebbe tried his utmost never to work on Shabbos, never ate treif. And from that first day that he was there, that he got a package from his uncle, the Kishinever Rebbe, he said, God, people think that God is not here. God is anywhere you let him in. We say Kinnos on Tisha B'Av. We say Kinnos on Tisha B'Av. And if you open up the Kinnos, I don't know, the version we have as 60, Art School version as 70. There are Kinnos made by the Inquisition. There are Kinnos made for anywhere in the world. Starting about a month ago, I began getting Kinnos from Israel. I got Kinnos from Israel. I got one general Kino, which we're going to be saying later. We will be singing it together. And in the last 5 days, I got Kinos from almost every kibbutz in Israel that was attacked. I have a Kina from kibbutz Be'eri. I have a Kina from Kfar Aza. I have a Kinos that someone wrote for the Chatufim for those that are kidnapped. I don't know how, and I got Kinos from the right and the left and the middle. A Jewish person, when we have suffering, when we have Tisha B'Av, Kinos are what reminds us. We put to words the suffering that we're going through. And we're going to be reading and singing one of the Kinnos, the new Kinnos that we have from that. We also read one from the Holocaust. We always lane, Tisha B'Av always falls out around Parshas Masay, but the Jewish people have been on a journey, a 2,000-year journey. And we go from place to place. We get to rapport. We get there, we finally move our way up in society. And as soon as we become anything, they start killing us. And they start murdering us. And if you ask me what was worse, the Holocaust or the Korban, I can't tell you. Ask me what was worse, the Holocaust or the Inquisition, I cannot tell you. You ask me what's worse, what's going on in Israel where the whole world hates us, they're all bad. They're all bad. And it's all because we do not have the Beis HaMikdash. And that's what Tisha B'Av is, the one day out of the year. One day out of the year. We're supposed to say to ourselves, I don't care how good you think we're doing and how powerful Israel is, until we have the Mashiach and the Gula Shlema, we are not safe. And Tisha B'Av is the one day a year where I hope you can at least focus. God has no home. We have no home. We're in a terrible situation, and therefore we need the Gula Shlema. What happened on October 7th? It shattered us. We thought Israel is safe. We thought the wall that we built was safe. We thought the Arabs hate us, but we're in charge. We thought the Israeli army was indestructible. And what happened, and it's been 315 days, we can't get Sinwar. We have hostages. Israelis are dying. 1,200 murdered, raped, killed, children. Whatever happened in the Kinnos happened to these 1,200. And therefore, we do need a Geula Shlema, the HaRav Yaakov. We focus today on one small part of our Jewish history, but there's been so many parts that have been most terrible. And every year we pick a different part, and that is what we have done today. We're not done. What we're going to do now, which we do every year, is we are going to, first of all, we are going to read the Kina for the Holocaust. We're going to read this together. It is in your Shul version. Paper. 171 in the Shul version, please. We're going to read the Shul version together, and then we're going to sing some well-known Kinnos together. So please, I don't want anyone leaving because we're not done. Please turn to page 171. 173. 173. We're going to read this all together. I hope everyone has it. I'm using the Shul's version because that's the only version that has this Kina. We're going to read it together. Please, I do not want to do this as by myself. Let's read it together. Oh, how thou hast cast down our glory from our head. Thou hast hidden thy face from us. Deus was angry and not had no pity. With a broken and contrite heart on a day of fasting and convocation, we come before thee to mourn and weep with deep lamentation. When we recall the martyrs of 1939, 45 European devastation, thou hast crushed the pride of Yaakov, whom thou didst love. Thou hast cast off the lofty of stature, degraded the tall ones. Thou hast laid waste our vines and blighted our fig trees. Our bones cleave to our skin and to our flesh. Thou hast utterly crushed our life to the ground. Our soul melts away from sorrow and sighing. The pleasant and the beloved, the upright and the perfect ones were loaded onto wagons like sheep and cattle. The heat was suffocating and the doors were sealed. Distinguished scholars sit on the ground in stunned silence. What, oh, what was their guilt, they ask, and why was their decree issued without mercy? Remember well the cry of the humble, the cry of the orphans, bereaved and forsaken, the derision of the scholars and their beloved disciples, heads of families, mighty men of valor, millions fell slain and wounded. It was a disgrace and a horror for the nations. Those whom we dandled and reared, and the tyrant utterly consumed like wolves tearing the prey. The shed the blood, 6 million massacred, who could imagine? They went down alive into the netherworld saying Shema Yisrael and singing Ani Ma'amin. Their souls departed while they were trapped in talus and filling, that the murderers be put to shame and confusion and be as naught. Our flesh and our hearts fail at the destruction of our portion. All of us raise lamentation for the desecration, destruction of half our nation, for the European Holocaust ranks equal to the destruction of our temple. To Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Birkenfeld, and Dachau, Madanyang, and Treblinka, where they were taken in disgrace, thrust into the gas chambers and burnt in the furnaces. Yet in the Warsaw Ghetto, the holy martyrs fought and fell like warriors. From every corner, their congealed blood cries out, "Oh, when will the end come to this, to the severe afflictions? Take up bitter lamentations and wailing for the holy martyrs. The blasphemers condemned the covenant of Avram and our law. Those who revile thee fell upon us, and we made our soul mourn with fasting. The crown has fallen from our head. Woe to our heritage. The scrolls of the law they cut into shreds, defiled them with their hands. They flayed the flesh of our kinsfolk and used their skin for their own adornment. Lament, girdle, sackcloth, and wail for them and for their children. Our eyes shed tears of blood over the burning of synagogues, for the destruction of the Shivot and academies. They destroyed our assemblies and demolished our congregations. Fear came upon us and trembling seized us. In our distress, confusion has covered our faces. In want and hunger, they gnawed the dry ground. Virtuous women took their own lives. The noise of their crying was heard as far as the Red Sea. Our kinsfolk and dearly loved friends, pious and upright, holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, receive and shelter them forevermore under thy cover of thy wings. O merciful one, remember in the mercy, the remnants of thy heritage, sovereign of the universe, remove anxiety and grief from thy people, uproot in thy wrath the wickedness of the nations and the enemies of Israel. Proclaim liberty to the captives and release our prisoners. Crown us with the oil of joy in place of mourning. Grant peace and tranquility to us and to our land. Raise our power and hasten our redemption speedily in our days. The desert shall rejoice that Israel, our state, blossom like a rose. Oh, bless us with the blessings of HaRav Yaakov Lehrfield, our office. We are now going to sing together. My son Yechiel here.
It's there.
Yechiel, I need you. We're first going to sing not a late Siyam, we're going to sing what page? In the show? We could say Siyam in Israel. I think 144 in the arts in the show version. My wife's grandfather, Rabbi Yechiel Aryeh, who this young man is named after, brought with him many minhagim from Germany. And he opened a camp called Camp Monk, which of course goes with many of his minhagim. An article, it's on page 390, and there's a kina in the Shul version 145, 144, English, Hebrew. In the Shul, it's on page, yes, on page 304 in the article version. And we sing it, there's a high part and a low part. It contrasts when we left Yerushalayim. When we left the Mitzrayim, we were in a high. God brought the Esher Makos. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. We left marching high with the Kriyas Yamsuf behind us. It was beautiful. However, 800 years later, after the Korban Abayis, we left Yerushalayim with our tail between our legs, and we were far shattered and we were broken. So there's a high part and a low part, and we're contrasting when we left Mitzrayim and when we left on a high part, and we left Yerushalayim after the Korban. Please sing along. We've been doing an issue for the last 25 years. So please sing along in the article. It's in your shul version. It's on page 145. Sing along, please. Go on.
Eis to God kirli l'halosiyam mi b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Kini ma'ira l'man ashkira b'tzeisi m'Yerushalayim Az yasher Moshe Shiloh B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim V'yakonei Yirmiyah v'Nahon Nehemiah B'tzeisi Yerushalayim B'Eisi Yisponan v'Shafan Yehonan B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim V'Chamas El Shofno L'Kanon B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Kahale Yaramu V'Chachom Kamu B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Zidunim Shatafu Yal Rosh Nitzafu B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Digan Shamayim U'Mitzur Yozim Mayim B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim V'Hana U'Veronim Mayim Hamorim B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Hashkem Haaretz Vigos Haforim B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Korei Elevel Al Na'aretz Babel B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Umaharet Kod Adonai K'Eshafel Safonai B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim V'cherem L'tushal Kamach Netushal B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Zevach U'mincha V'shemen Hamishcha B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Segula Telekucha Kitzah Letivcha B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Chagim Shabbos U'Mahosim V'Yosos B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Tanis V'Yevel Urdov HaHevel B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Tohu V'Holim V'Yaharva Golim B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Ya'alei Yishmaelim Machanot Zareilim B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Yovel Shmita V'Yeretz Shokeita B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Machor V'Tzvisos V'Charus V'Chosos B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Kaporos V'Yaron V'Yavnei Zikaron B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Yavnei HaKalon U'Chlei HaBalon B'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim Leviim Aharonim V'Shivim Zekenim B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Yoshim U'Monim U'Mofrim Moshe Yereinu Yaharon Yaseinu B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim Nebuchadnezzar V'Adam Nustesar B'Tzeisi Mirushalayim Na'arech V'Adam Neshama B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim Rachak Mimenu V'Hinei Einenu B'Tzeisi Mirushalayim Tisrei Baruch Esb'Tisrei Marech Esb'Tzeisi Mitzrayim Leimadi Tefes V'Alai Tefes B'Tzeisi Mirushalayim I love the spot and be shiny folk and B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim the Fereg with the Karin the Netzion Hayikarin B'Tzeisi Mirushalayim HaRav Yaakov Lehrfield B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim Tzrikos Usruos Kolos Usvos B'Tzeisi Mirushalayim Tzitzatzah B'Ha'amshel L'Raha B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim Ushlach HaNezer V'Yafas HaEzer B'Tzeisi Mirushalayim Kedusha V'Vuah V'Koredar Nagir B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim Nigala V'Koram Ruach Hatuma B'Tzeisi Mirushalayim Rina V'Yeshua V'Chatzos V'Trua B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim Sakas Solom Nakas Polo B'Tzeisi Mirushalayim Shulchan Norah V'Chalil Torah B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim Elil B'Soiva Vesil Matzeva B'Tzeisi Mirushalayim Torah Suda V'Seah Chemda B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim Satzah B'Timcha V'Tatzah Hadacha V'Shuvi Yerushalayim.
We also sing a late Sion. We also sing a late Sion in the art scroll. It can be found on page 390. In your shul version, it's on 176. We all know the tune. We are giving out now, after we finish singing a late Sion from your Kinnos, we are going to be singing. This was written for October 7th to the tune of a late Sion. So when we finish singing the original late Sion, we're now going to sing this with the same tune of a late Sion. It was written by HaRav Yaakov. It's a beautiful kina. It discusses what happened on October 7th. Again, I have many keynotes on what happened on October 7th. I picked this one because I continue with a late Sion. We're going to sing a late Sion inside. In your art scroll, it's on page 390. In your shul, it's on 176. And when we finish, we're going to sing this version of a kina written for October 7th.
Elitzion v'yarecha Timoisha b'tzirecha v'chipsulo chagurasak Al niurecha Alei arbon asher nutach Biash masir nadorecha Yal bias mecharfeyel b'sof mikdash chadoreha Alei galus mishar seyel Ani meishir zimareha Bial dorom asher shukach Kivo meimeyeoreha Alei hegyon b'choleha Asher Dovam V'Yoreha V'Yavah Sefdovim Uvitu Sanhedreha Kalei Mideha Uvin Yodei V'Choreha V'Yavtilu Kileiha Umizrael Kitoreha Alei Tabei Milacheha B'nei David Gemireha V'Yaf Yom Asher Shacha V'Yisaru Kisareha Alei Kavod Asher Gala V'Yis Korban Devireha V'Yalochetz Asher Lachatz B'Sam Sakin Fagureha Alei Machas V'Romakos Asher Hukun Nezireha V'Al Niputz Alei Selah Allah Le'avni Oreha Alei Simcha Asoleha Zachaku al Shemorecha V'Al Nigre B'nei Chorin V'Tireha Tehoreha Alei Pesha Asher Yisod Silu Derem Ashureha V'Al Tzivos Keholeha Shizu Fecha Shechoreha Alei Kolos Mechar Fecha V'Yeis Rabu V'Goreha V'Al Rikshas V'Gad Fecha V'Sof Mishkan Fatzereha Alei Shemcha Asher Kulam V'Fi Kamein Mitzireha V'Al Tachan Yitzhak Kulam Kisho Pushpa Amareha Elei Sion V'Yareha Imo Isha Mitzireha V'Chipsu Lo Chagurasak Al Ve'al Leoreha
New page, October 7th.
Simchas Torah Shmini Atzeret V'cholenu l'suga koderes biyom zenit ritu ha'keros Yoshvei otei hafakim u'shteros V'la harseyum ha'isale birmas V'ivei ha'aretz ha'amas Vertuas azov mikor haresha Ishores Ramas Yotzot Sefa Eicha B'Kom Sheva HaKafos Nasu Al Nafsham Me'im Asmatifos Oyei Matzor Naseis Rifos Roseach Lashpil V'Lia Harpos Kanfei Ruach Kanfei Nishorim V'Urayinu Yaros Vayolim Orim Esmiras Mikabrim Chaskein V'Yatzei Madas Amirim Oshay Matufin Kiraduro Lashulim Nitakurim Yavas Nitzachim Shakein V'Suim Romein Nitakim Nahel Adasfar Chesed V'Rachamim Modim Achnulah Al Midinaseinu Al Gilaseinu Yam Vidos Nafsheinu Muchadim Tolivneinu Havlias Miarseinu Rokesh Ben David Nishiach Sinkeinu.
Let's finish offerings, please.
Certainly will today.
You want this? Sure.
I'm gonna try mine.
Thank you, good.
There will be a video presentation at 12:30. Fellows is at 101.
If you want this.
Regular minutes.
I don't think so.
35 hour.
What time is your mom?
Yes.
Many years ago, there was an article, I think, in Kinnos magazine, where Rabbi Wallace the Spanish government to apologize for what they had done during the an official apology from the government.